everybody, it's Dr. Jackson again, and we're going to talk right now about the poems that you were supposed to read this week from Petrarch. By now, you should have listened to the video that I recorded about your next and final paper for this course. So if you've watched that, and if you haven't, you need to stop and go watch it, then you know that you are going to be able to choose from one of the sonnets that we're going to be reading over the next 2 weeks. Now, before we really get deep into this video, if you have not printed out a copy of those poems, it would be super helpful to you to stop the video, go print out a copy of the poems, get yourself some paper and a pen, and take notes so that you can help to get some ideas for your paper. So go ahead and take a minute to do that, and I'll be here when you get back. All right, by now I hope you're sitting down with a copy of the poems and some paper and a pen, and you're ready to take some notes and annotate the poems so you can get some ideas about what you're going to write. So the poet that we're talking about today is Francesco Petrarch. Let my clock chime. There we go. Ah, the joys of home learning. So we're going to talk about Francesco Petrarch. He was an Italian. He was a contemporary of Machiavelli's and of Dante's. So they may have known each other, probably would have been aware of each other. And Petrarch's notable because he is the first Nobel laureate since ancient times. Now, you'll notice in this slide that he has on this, real cute little leafy crown right here. Well, that's a symbol that he's the poet laureate. The poet laureate is a court-appointed poet. What that means is that the king or the queen or the president can pick somebody that is going to be the poet for that particular monarchy or that particular rule. And that king, let's just use king from here on out for ease, that king can go to the poet laureate and say, I would like you to write a poem because I've been the king for 20 years. Or I would like you to write a poem about how great our country is. Or we just won this particular battle and I'd like you to write a poem about that. So in other words, the poet laureate writes mainly for the person who's paying them. And it's usually a lifetime appointment, and it has a lot of prestige. And as part of becoming the laureate, traditionally, laureates would get that crown of laurels. If you've watched the Olympics in the past, there was a few years ago that they gave the winners of the medals, they gave them laurel crowns to put on, which, is very appropriate because it comes from ancient times. Now, if you have any bay leaves in your spice cabinet at home, those are related to the laurel bush, and that's what those are. So the poems that we're going to be looking at today are sometimes called Petrarchan, after Petrarch. They're also called Italian sonnets because he was Italian. When we look at Shakespeare, we're going to see that there are Shakespearean or English sonnets, just for the very same reasons. So just something for you to pack away in your pocket. All right. A lot of the poems that we're going to be looking at today have to do with this woman, Laura de Noailles. Now, we don't know if Petrarch really knew her. We don't know if he really truly was writing about her, or if he said that he was writing about her because her name, Laura, sounds like laurel. And it may have been a way for him to play with that word and to work it into his poetry. If we were going to be reading the poems in Italian, they would have, certainly it would sound prettier because Italian sounds prettier than English, and it definitely sounds prettier than English read by your teacher who has a pretty strong Texas accent. But at any rate, we would get a lot of these puns on that word Laura, but many of those are lost in the translation. And in our discussions in class, I think I've said that to you more than once, that sometimes things are lost in the translation because Greek is not equal to English, and Italian's not equal to English, and French, and so on. And that's what that means. But at any rate, she seems to be the subject of the poems And he seems to be writing about a love that he could not obtain for one reason or another. Either she was already married or she did not have any clue who he was and didn't give him the time of day. But that makes Petrarch kind of be an equal to Dante, because even though we didn't get to it in our reading of the Inferno, Dante wrote the Inferno partly as a way not only to write about everybody who'd made him mad, but to elevate the object of his love, a woman named Beatrice. You would say Beatrice in Italian. Doesn't that sound prettier? So we have both of these Italian writers writing about an unobtainable love object and the pain that comes from not having any real contact with the person that you love. And at your age, I hope you've had some crushes before, and you know what it feels like to have a love that you cannot attain for whatever reason, and that can really stink, doesn't it? It gets better. But that's really what is going on in these poems in large part. All right, let's talk about what sonnet means. Sonnet means little song in Italian. And part of the fun of reading a sonnet to me is that it has a really distinctive format. It's always 14 lines long, so you can recognize it right away. It's 14 lines long, always. Now, sometimes sonnets are broken down in Petrarchan Italian sonnets. We have a division of an octet, the first 8 lines of the poem, and often those 8 lines have some kind of question or some kind of problem that's contained in those first 8 lines. Then the last 6 lines are called the sestet, and sometimes the sestet has the answer or the resolution to the problem, not always. But that makes it kind of fun to read these poems because you know that it has that set format and you can kind of depend on that. And a lot of times it can help you to untangle what's going on in the poem. Before we start looking at the poems themselves, I just want to add a little note to you that part of the reason I want you to write a paper about poetry is that it's harder to read than reading just a straightforward prose story, because there are not as many words. And because there are not as many words, every single word is important. I believe that if you can untangle a poem and explain what you think it means, that you can read almost anything, no matter how hard it is, because poetry it's harder. It's a harder skill set. And I know you guys are just going to do a great job on doing this. And I hope it'll be a fun exercise for you and kind of propel you forward as you get ready to go onto that real college campus. So let's get those poems out. The poems that we're looking at come from a work called the Canzoniere, and it's a collection of several hundred poems that are about Laura and about Petrarch. Even though the poems are very personal, I want to remind you in your paper, you cannot say Petrarch says, you have to say the speaker says, because we're not 100% sure that Petrarch himself is the actual speaker. So just a little caveat for you. Okay, let's get that first poem out. I'm going to take a sip of water. If you got to be around me in person, you would know that I exist on a pretty steady diet of cold water and Hall's cough drops because I have horrible allergy problems. So I'm always wheezy and sneezy, and it's a whole lot of sexy for one person, but I do what I can to handle it. All right. If you look at this poem, you're going to notice, let's see if I can move this little deal. I can hide it. Okay. You're going to notice that they start with these words they're in Italian. And I don't speak Italian, and you probably don't either. If you do, goody for you. But this is just the first line of the poem in Italian. The poems don't really have titles in and of themselves. We usually refer to them by this number and by that first line. So when you write your paper, if you want to refer to the poem by this first line in English, that's fine with me. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at this. I'm not going to give you every single interpretation and explain everything all the way through. because I want to leave some room for you to bring in your own interpretation. So I'm just going to be hitting the high spots on these poems. All right, here we go. You who hear the sound in scattered rhymes of those sighs on which I fed my heart in my first vagrant youthfulness, when I was partly other than I am, I hope to find pity and forgiveness for all the modes in which I talk and weep between vain hope and vain sadness in those who understand love through its trials. Yet I see clearly now. Now, I want to point out to you this word, yet. That's one of those coordinating conjunctions that you've heard about for about a million years. Remember fanboys? For, and, nor, but, or, yet, so? Okay, those coordinating conjunctions, when we start a sentence with them, we really need to stop and pay attention. Think about when you have conversations with your friends and they say things like, I really like him, but. You and I know that what comes after the but is what your friend really thinks. I really like him, but he's kind of a jerk. Here's what we really think. It works the same way in poetry as it does in conversation. So if the poet inserts one of those coordinating conjunctions, and we're going to see it a lot with Petrarch because he's really fond of it, you need to stop and pay attention. So in this first part, he's saying, you know, this is the first poem in the collection. Hey, here I am, and you're going to hear my poetry, and I wrote some of it when I was younger, when I was partly other than I am. When I was a younger person, before I had all these experiences, before I had all this stuff that I know, some of it may sound immature to you, and I hope that you're going to forgive me. So he says, I hope to find pity and forgiveness. All right. And then we get down to this yet. Yet I see clearly now I have become an old tale amongst all these people, so that it often makes me ashamed of myself. He seems to be saying, people, I don't need to tell you about my poetry because apparently people are talking about me. They're going, yeah, there goes Petrarch. Don't get him started on Laura because he'll never shut up. I know, and it's the same old sad story. You know, you can just hear people talking about him that way. And he has kind of an awareness that he's become an object of gossip because he's so hung up on this woman who won't have anything to do with him. All right, let's look at these last three lines. And shame is the fruit of my vanities, and remorse, and the clearest knowledge of how the world's delight is a brief dream. Now, I said in the sonnet paper video that you could look at individual words, and this poem, boy, does it have a lot of fodder for that, because you've got, let's look up here, it's got sighs. Look at where my little cursor is circling around. Sighs, vagrant, pity, forgiveness, weep, vain, and you've got vain twice in that sentence, so I'd pay attention. Vain, sadness, trials, old tale, ashamed, vanities, remorse. You've got some pretty significant words in there to play with. Pretty great stuff. Okay, let's move on. Now, this poem was dated on April 6, 1327. If you think about it, Petrarch would have been a Catholic, of course, because he lived before the Protestant Reformation. And April 6th, usually Easter falls sometime in March or April, right? Okay, well, April 6th seemed to have been an important date to Petrarch, either because it was Easter or maybe he saw Laura for the first time. And this poem is about seeing the beloved for the first time on Easter. So before we even look at it, think about this. Here's this Italian guy. He's going to church on Easter like everybody else there is going to church on Easter, and he's expecting to go into church and pray. I mean, I don't think for most of us that you think about going to church to hook up with somebody. I mean, yeah, it happens. People meet in church, and that's a lovely way to meet, but that's not really what's going on in his mind. He thinks he's going to go in there to pray. So let's look at what happens. It was on that day when the sun's ray was darkened in pity for its maker that I was captured. All right, by saying it was darkened in pity for its maker. There are legends that when Christ was crucified, that there was an earthquake, that the world went dark, and that's a type of literary device called pathetic fallacy, Fallacy. You may have heard of that before. Pathetic fallacy means that nature responds in some type of human way. We know that it can't, but that it's a literary device. It's very, very common. So he's saying it was on that day when the sun's ray was darkened in pity for its maker, the earth was weeping because Christ was dead. It was on that day when the sun's ray was darkened in pity for its maker that I was captured and did not defend myself because your lovely eyes had bound me, lady. Boy, he wasn't expecting that. He walks into church to pray, and here is Miss Hotness 101. It did not seem to me to be a time to guard myself against love's blows. I wasn't expecting to go in and see you. That's not what I thought was going to happen. So I went on confident, unsuspecting. From that, my troubles started amongst the public sorrows. Love discovered me all weaponless. Now, if you go back and look earlier in this poem, we've already got some other kind of weaponry and words going on. We've got captured and defend and bound and guard, unsuspecting and weaponless. So there again, you got to look at these individual words because they can be really key to understanding the poem. Love discovered me all weaponless. I'm on this first line, line 9 of the sestet. Now, one thing that Petrarch really loves to do is to combine pagan images, those things from Greece and Rome that we learned about at the beginning of the semester. Aren't you glad we did that? He's going to combine those Greek and Roman figures and stories into his poems and kind of juxtapose those with Christian images. And that's something he really loves to do. And you may be able to figure out why he's doing that other than just letting us know, hey, I'm a smart guy and I know all this stuff. All right, let's look back again at line 9. Love discovered me all weaponless and opened the way to the heart through the eyes. Now, that's the way it happens for a lot of us, right? You see somebody and you think they're cute or you're attracted to them. I mean, I remember the first time I saw my husband, I thought, who is that? And almost 30 years later, I'm still thinking, who is that? God, it changes, but it's still, it's still there. Okay, love discovered me all weaponless and opened the way to the heart through the eyes, which are made the passageways and doors of tears. Well, that doesn't sound like a really happy romance. So that it seems to me it does him little honor to wound me with his arrow. Who in the world is he talking about? What Greek or Roman figure had an arrow and would wound people with love? Cupid. Yeah, exactly. We don't expect to see Cupid in a Christian church. He's a pagan god. Petrarch wasn't expecting it. And that may be why he's hit even harder, because he wasn't expecting it. So that it seems to me it does him little honor to wound me with his arrow in that state. He not showing his bow at all to you who are armed. So he seems to be saying, I got it worse because I wasn't expecting it. Whereas this young woman seems like she's kind of prepared to go in there and pray and not be distracted by anything else. And she's not even impacted by what's going on. But I'm shattered by this experience, shattered and, lovelorn now. Okay, let's move on. All right. Now, in this poem, Petrarch is going to really elevate the beloved, or the speaker is going to elevate the beloved and really put her on a pedestal. I don't know why it makes me think of that song, She's So High Above Me. I won't sing it to you because I'll spare you that. But it just makes me think of that song a whole lot. All right. She let her gold hair scatter in the breeze that twined it in 1,000 sweet knots, and wavering light beyond measure would burn in those beautiful eyes, which are now so dim, and it seemed to me her face wore the color of pity. I do not know whether false or true. I who had the lure of love in my breast, what wonder if I suddenly caught fire? Maybe he was already prepared to fall in love. Sometimes we are. Her way of moving was no mortal thing, but of angelic form, and her speech rang higher than a mere human voice. A celestial spirit, a living sun was what I saw. And if she is not such now, the wound's not healed, although the bow is slack. Now, think about that. If you've ever watched an archer, my niece is an archer, when you release the bow, when you release the arrow, the bow gets loose, slack, because the arrow's sprung. So the wound's already happened to the speaker. It hasn't happened to the woman at all. She seems to be not impacted, and he thinks that she's like an angel. She's almost not human because she's so wonderful and rare. Now, again, if you're going to look at words in this poem, we've got gold hair and wavering light, lots of images of like angels, okay? He caught fire. She's no mortal thing. She's an angelic form. She's got a voice that's higher than a mere human voice. So there are lots of images of her being an angel and him just being just a guy. You've got celestial spirit down here. Okay, lots of things to play with there. All right, let's move on. All right, I really love this poem. It's so different, and it's not what you would typically think of in a love poem. If you look at this first 4 lines of the octet, all of these words, those are all rivers, all of them. And they're rivers that would be in Europe and in Asia and in Africa, which was the known world during Petrarch's time because he died before Columbus, before other people started to discover other parts of the world. So he's got all of these rivers right here. Okay, we're going to come back to that in just a minute. Then the first line, line 5, you've got these different types of wood. And all of these types of woods, they have 2 things in common. Number 1, they are super invasive. If you get them in your garden, it's really hard to get rid of them. Ask your folks if they've ever had ivy in their yard. Once it gets going, you cannot get rid of that stuff. It just takes over the earth. So all of these plants that are listed are like that. They're really invasive. And also, thing number 2 that they have in common is if you try to burn them, they burn really slowly. Now, think about that in terms of love. Sometimes we have love that is a slow burn. It just keeps going, and you think you have somebody out of your system, and man, you just keep burning for that person. So it's interesting. Lots of water, and then all of this stuff that burns slow and that it's invasive. So think about what that can mean. All right, let's go on reading this. Not Ticino, Po, Varo, Arno, Adige, or Tiber, Euphrates, Tigris, Nile, Erano, Indus, or Ganges, Don, Danube, Alpheus, Garonne, or the breaking sea, Rhone, Tiber, Rhine, Seine, Elbe, Loire, Ebro. Not ivy, fir, pine, beech, or juniper could lessen the fire that vexes my sad heart. Vexes is a good word. That means it just wears you out. Could lessen the fire that vexes my sad heart as much as the lovely river that always weeps with me and the little tree I adorn and praise in verse. All right, this little tree right here in line, let's see, 7, 8, line 8, sorry. I'm an English teacher, can't count. All right, the little tree that I adorn, he's talking about the laurel bush, okay? He may be making a pun here that's lost on us. Sometimes you call pages of a book leaves, or he may be using the laurel leaves to write the poems on, or he's wearing it around he's making some type of play. And it's kind of arrogant. It's like, remember me, I'm Petrarch, I'm really good. Yeah, we get it, because, these poems are 600 years old and we're still reading them. We get it. All right. None of this water, none of this slow burning stuff could put out this fire that's burning on him. All right, I find they help against the assaults of love, while I must live well armed the life which passes by in such swift leaps. Let the beautiful laurel grow so on the green bank, and let him who planted it in the sweet shade write lofty and joyful thoughts to the sound of water. Okay, so what could be going on in the poem is that even though the speaker is in love with somebody who doesn't return his affections, it also gives him something to write about. If he didn't have this pain in his life, what would he be doing? He's got constant inspiration for writing because of the pain, because of the love, because of his undying ardor for this woman who doesn't even know that he's drawing breath. Okay? So, just kind of interesting. Let's keep going. All right. This is a really important poem. It's usually considered one of the central poems of the Canzoniere because of one of the lines that is in the octet, and I'll point it out when we get to it. It's line 7, so just hang tight for a minute. All right, now that the sky and the earth and the wind are silent, and the wild creatures and the birds are reined in sleep, night leads its starry chariot in its round, and the sea without a wave lies in its bed. Now, you've got images in that first 4 lines of pagan images drawing a starry chariot so that you can go to sleep. Okay? And he says in line 5, the speaker says, I look, think, burn, weep. He's supposed to be falling asleep, but he can't because he's looking, thinking, burning, weeping. And you and I both know that sometimes when you should be lying down to go to sleep is when your mind just starts to race. And as much as you try to stop thinking about something, you can't. It happens to everybody. It stinks. But it's just part of life. And he's saying, this is what happens to me when I lie down to go to bed. I should be going to sleep, but I can't because I look, think, burn, weep. And she who destroys me is always before my eyes to my sweet distress. War is my state. Here's the line that's so important. And a lot of translations of this particular poem have it translated in a different way that I actually like better. It'll be, I am a war. I am a war. Think about that. If you were able to say, I am a war, that you are constantly at battle with yourself. There's no peace, there's no rest because you're constantly stirred up about something. Ooh, that would be awful. If you are, little friends, let's talk to a mental health professional because seriously, they can help you with that. We don't want to be at war. That's no good. Okay. War is my state, filled with grief and anger, and only in thinking of her do I find peace. But what irony, because he thinks about her all the time, and that's why he's at war. So no happiness there. So now looky here. Here's another one of those coordinating conjunctions. Remember I told you to watch out for those earlier? For, and, nor, but, or, yet. So, all right, we got to pay attention. So, from one pure living fountain flowed the sweet and bitter which I drink. Humans have to take in fluid. They have to. The fluid he takes in is sweet and quenches his thirst, but it's also bitter at the same time, and there's no escaping it. He has to have something to drink. So from one pure living fountain flow the sweet and bitter which I drink. One hand alone heals me and pierces me. And so that my ordeal may not reach heaven, that should be heaven, not haven, friends, sorry. I am born and die 1,000 times a day. I am so far from my salvation. Man, it makes me wish that Petrarch could have had some Xanax or something. It might have helped him. Not that I would ever say that, but nonetheless. Aren't you glad you haven't had to sit through me in class, because you would know that I am just crazy and I'll do almost anything to make you guys laugh, even if I can't hear you laugh, because I can envision you saying, wow, Dr. Jackson seems so normal in her emails, but now I've listened to her and I know, no, she's not. It's 25 years of teaching. It'll make you lose your mind. All right, let's move on. Okay, now we're at a point in the collection. You may notice that the last poem was 164, and we're going to jump way ahead. This is 292. So at this point in the collection, a number of the poems have to do with Laura's death. And a poem that has to do with someone's death is a special type of poem called an elegy, E-L-E-G-Y. An elegy is a genre of poetry. It's about someone who's died, and somebody who's died, the bell has tolled for them, somebody who's died way before their time, a lot of times, okay? So this can be a sonnet and an elegy at the same time, and it is. All right, the eyes I spoke about so warmly, the arms, the hands, the ankles, and the face that left me so divided from myself and made me different from other men. The crisp hair of pure shining gold and the brightness of the angelic smile which used to make a paradise on earth are now little dust that feels no thing. She's gone. She's gone. And look at that, another coordinated conjunction right there. And I still live, which I grieve over and disdain, left without the light I loved so much, in great ill fortune, in a shattered boat. He could mean a real boat. I suspect he's talking about his body as a vessel that's no longer complete. It's no longer able to carry him around the way that it was, because his beloved is gone. In great ill fortune, in a shattered boat. Now make an end of my loving songs. The vein of my accustomed wit is dry. My lyre is turned again to weeping. All right, his wit is dry, his inspiration is dried up, but I want to point out this right here, my lyre, L-Y-R-E. A lyre is a stringed instrument. It's in the family of a harp. The piano is a stringed instrument too. Guitar is a stringed instrument. But the Greeks would have used a lyre, like Homer would have used a lyre to strum while he sang the Odyssey, because we know that he sang it to his audiences. And lyre is where we get the word lyric, L-Y-R-I-C, like the words to a song are called a lyric, because that type of poetry comes from music. And definitely a stringed instrument can sound like it's crying. There's a Beatles song by George Harrison called While My Guitar Gently Weeps. You could look that up, and it does sound like it's crying. So again, in this poem, there are lots of images of an angelic being. You know, we've got crisp hair of pure shining gold, angelic smile, paradise, lyre, you've got all that. So there's a lot to play with there in this particular poem. Okay. Now, if you're going to look at this poem, it has a lot of allusions, to some Greek and Roman stories. You've got Zephyr right here, and Zephyr is a character in some of those ancient myths. It's Zephyr, we use that word to mean a soft breeze. So it has kind of a double meaning here. And then you've got Procne in the third line. Oops, sorry. And Philomela. And that comes from a story that there was some type of cheating going on. And Philomela kind of took a page out of Medea's book and killed her kids and fed them to Procne. You know, that kind of real fun little family story that the Greeks just love to tell. So if you're going to look at this poem, you might want to look up that story just so you have a little context for why Petrarch may be using the story. He may have some reasons for including that. All right, so let's look at it. Zephyr returns and brings fair weather, and the flowers and the herbs, his sweet family, and Procne singing, and Philomela weeping, and the white springtime and the vermilion. Vermilion is a shade of red. Okay? The meadows smile, and the skies grow clear. Jupiter is joyful, gazing at his daughter. Okay, there's another Greek image. The air and earth and water are filled with love. Every animal is reconciled to loving. So in the octet, we've got lots of images of spring, right? We've got fair weather, flowers, herbs, springtime, meadows smiling. Okay, lots of stuff about spring. But, there's a coordinating conjunction again. But to me, alas, there return the heaviest sighs that she draws from the deepest heart, who took the keys of it away to heaven. Yeah, it's spring, but Laura's gone, and I don't even care about spring. It doesn't make any difference to me. And the song of little birds in the flowering fields and the sweet, virtuous actions of women are a wasteland to me of bitter and savage creatures. Now, in this sonnet, we don't really have question solution, but what we have is more a juxtaposition. In the octet, we have all of these sweet, lovely images of spring, and in the sestet, we have, but that doesn't matter to me, in contrast, because the speaker is so unhappy. Okay. Now, at the end of this, we're at number 333, so we're in the tail end. This is another elegy poem, another tribute to Laura, to the beloved. All right, my sad verse, go to the harsh stone that hides my precious treasure in the earth. Well, that harsh stone could be her gravestone, her tombstone. Go to the harsh stone that hides my precious treasure in the earth. Call to her there. She will reply from heaven, though her mortal part is in a low, dark place. Now, this line with the mortal part in a low, dark place, because Petrarch was a Catholic and like Dante, and you didn't have to read all of the Inferno. You didn't have to. Dante examines both the Inferno, hell, and then purgatory, the Purgatorio, and then the Paradiso. So he looks at the whole gamut of the afterlife experience from hell to purgatory to heaven. So in this poem, her mortal part is in a low, dark place. Petrarch could be referring not to hell, but to purgatory. That his beloved hasn't yet made it to heaven for whatever reason. I mean, he could mean hell too, but probably he's referring to purgatory, I would suspect. All right, say to her, I'm already tired of navigating these foul waves, but gathering up the scattered leaves step by step like this, I follow her. Now, he can mean literal leaves. He can mean leaves of his poetry. That's where there may be a pun, especially if we were reading this in Italian. Only I go speaking of her, living and dead, yet alive and made immortal now, so that the world can know of her and love her. Well, yeah, he's made her immortal because almost 700 years later, we're sitting here reading these poems about this woman who died a long time ago, who may not have even known that he lived or breathed. She may not have cared. All right, let it please her to watch for my passing that is near now. He means his passing, his death, not just passing by, but dying. Let us meet together, and her draw me and call me to what she is in heaven. So, he's tired of living. He wants to be with his beloved. Okay? So that is what's going on there. And that is the end for today, my friends, of what you're doing. So let me know if you have any questions, and go ahead and still post in our discussions like you would in a normal week.